why well, first of all, you write about how Obama, who is beloved, I mean, more beloved than Jimmy Carter, who's actually taken a few brave stands since he was president. How Obama ran on his support for Afghanistan. And then his re-election campaign was based on that he took out bin Laden, who was just a sitting duck, and they were just basically waiting to take him out for an election. Where does the accountability moment for Obama come in?
Yeah, well, I don't know. You're right that at least Bush has, mostly a blemish on his record from that. People think of him as a bad president. A blemish is not the right way to put it. People think of him as having blown out. He left office on a 20% approval rating, so at least we have that for him, that despite whatever, TV news says about it, that most people hold him in scorn. It's true, I think, with Obama that his reputation is not as harmed. Frankly, I don't think, the height of the Iraq War, 2005, 6, 7, you had Americans getting blown the hell up over there and really wondering what's it all for. In the height of the Afghan War, we did lose another 1,000 guys in the surge and around that. And it was a bad deal, but it never reflected badly on politics in Washington, D.C. at all. Liberals looked the other way. And if anything, Republicans grudgingly supported it, even though it was Obama doing it. It was a war that they supported too. And I don't necessarily mean the Republican people of the country, but the Republican leaders in D.C., especially led by John McCain and Lindsey Graham, who were the biggest bullies on the issue and all of that. So just the way the political stars were aligned, it wasn't really in anyone's proper interest to go after Obama as a war hawk on most of these things. So his reputation suffered much less. But what he did in Afghanistan is just as bad as what Bush did. And just to be clear with Bush, what he did was he decided to change the regime in Kabul and then create a new government. So just letting the people of Afghanistan choose their new government. He would have Zalmay Khalilzad, Richard Pearl's friend, would come in and he would pick the new leader. And so they picked a Unical lobbyist named Hamid Karzai to come in and be the sock puppet there. And then they said, look, we need a strong central government, as Colin Powell put it, to keep Iran and Russia and India and everybody else out. And so if we don't want the foreign powers messing around Afghanistan, we need a strong democratic Afghanistan that surely is within the capability of the U.S. Army to build. And then it'll be an ally with us forever and everything will be great. And so that's what we'll do. But then, of course, I mean, the whole thing is a government program. So like, geez, I don't know. Who should we make the governor of some province I've never heard of? I don't know. Karzai says, let's choose this guy. So we choose this guy. But it turns out this guy's the worst guy in Afghanistan, not just for the job, but overall. And so watch him as he goes. And I borrow heavily from Anand Gopal's book, No Good Men Among the Living, in mine, where he describes all of these Pashtun warlords down in Kandahar and Helmand province and in Nangarhar province, where like this one guy, PKZ, Pacha Khan Zardari, was known as, like, I guess he was primarily known to people as the child rapist. And of course, also a heroin dealer and a murderer and an extortionist and a warlord and a killer in all the other different ways too. And this is a guy who was a governor to different provinces just because he was buddies with Hamid Karzai. And then the narrative here is you better learn to love American democracy when the people of the land are not picking these guys. They didn't have a local election for this guy. He's foisted on them by the central government that the Americans imposed. And, by the time the surge started in early Obama, David Petraeus, the general who pushed for that surge and was more responsible for it than any other person than Obama himself. He admitted that, it's true that the Taliban's system of civil and criminal justice is far superior to, or at least is far preferred by the local Pashtun population of the country in the south and east of the country to the systems of government that we have created for them. So we have judges and we have police chiefs and we have governors and we have all these offices that we've created, and they're all run by criminals. and the local population absolutely hates them. So even where you have Pashtun representation in the government, it doesn't mean that the people have representation. It just means that their warlord, their local evil, horrible child rapist warlord, now has even more power than before, because now he's tied to the federal government that's backed by the United States, and so has even more impunity than before. If you really cross him, he might sick the Marines on you. He might say that you're a Taliban and send the Americans to come and get your ass. And so it's just it was just a mess. That once they bit off the project, they let bin Laden, they could have negotiated. They could have focused on bin Laden. They could have at least, punished the Taliban with some strikes, but not overthrown them. Or they could have overthrown it, but not created a new government. Then, they could have created a new government, but they didn't have to then wage war against all of its enemies forever, and just get bogged down. At this point, they bit off way more than they could chew. And that's by the end of 2002. They decided we're going to remake this whole damn country. They were absolutely, they'd written themselves a blank check for something that was absolutely impossible to accomplish. And as we know now, they knew it was impossible to accomplish all along and lied about it for their own individual purposes and political purposes all the way through for 20 years.
And you write that it was really Obama who lost the war. I mean, this is a pivotal period where, basically Petraeus conceives the surge. Then they bring in the strategic genius, Stanley McChrystal, to execute it. McChrystal now is like the epitome of the Beltway blob right now, who runs this revolving door lobbying surveillance firm called the McChrystal Group. And at the time, they're running everything through John McCain and Lindsey Graham, the two biggest kind of neocon ciphers in the Senate, working with the Center for New American Security, the Democrats sort of outsourced foreign policy brain, which is funded by the arms industry, their think tank. And McChrystal embarks on, what did they send in? 77,000 soldiers. And they swear that this is going to wipe out the Taliban. This is going to be it. This will be victory. And they completely fail. Matthew Ho had already sounded the alarm that there was no chance of winning on the ground. We had Danny Davis, another officer from the military, come out as a whistleblower. And none of this was heeded in Washington. 1,500 U.S. troops died fighting this hopeless surge. Then McChrystal's removed because of Michael Hastings, one of the few brave mainstream journalists at the time, who later died in a bizarre car accident. And then Petraeus and Obama take on, after a defeat was imminent, they take on the rest of the war, still convincing themselves that they're going to win. And just this week, Petraeus is running around on all the networks and across the media attacking Biden for pulling out. So, just bring us back to this pivotal period of the surge and how it was made obvious that victory was impossible.
Man, talk about chutzpah. That David Petraeus, he should be hiding deep in a hole right now.
And I should tell you, I ran into him.
Everyone else.
I ran into him inside the Atlantic Council, where he was sitting in the front row for a presentation by Charles Lister and a bunch of other think tank clowns talking about how Syria was going to be democratized by funding the moderate rebels, and they were vetting all the rebels. And he went into a meeting afterwards with these characters in a conference room. So he's been involved in, he actually was advising supporting Al-Qaeda, moderate Al-Qaeda in Syria.
You can read it in the Daily Beast even, where they go, geez, I don't know. This is kind of a weird way to say it. We try to pretend that they're not Al-Qaeda when we support backing them. We don't outright admit that they're Al-Qaeda when we support backing them, David. Jeez. Yeah. Which, of course, he had been running the campaign to funnel all the guns and terrorists from Libya to Syria before he got fired for his sex scandal and everything when he was the head of the CIA. That was, a fast forwarding. But anyway, no, I call him the great American fraud, David Petraeus. He's the biggest loser general in American history, but he's good at PR. And I guess, the Washington reporters are not good at critical thinking at all. But this is the guy who, when he got to Iraq, his first job was arming up a bunch of Iraqi army guys, officers and enlisted guys, and arming them and training them, creating a giant armed force out of them. And as soon as he left, maybe even before he left, they took all their weapons and training and just joined the insurgency. And that's all he'd done was just, arm up a huge part of the Sunni insurgency. So then he went, and then went to Baghdad. And then in Baghdad, his new job was training the Badr Brigade, the Shiite militia, and turning them into the core of the Iraqi army and instituting the El Salvador option, where he hired James Steele and I forgot the other guy, the two retired colonels, to run this project to use the Iraqi militias as, first of all, the core of the Iraqi army, but also these separate off-the-books death squads to torture and murder the leaders of the Sunni insurgency that he had just spent so much time and money and weapons and training empowering. And then that was, in 2005. And that was really what set the stage for the civil war right there. That was a huge part of that.
Set the stage for the rise of ISIS.
Yep. Then he comes in 2007. And this is the only victory he ever won in his life, as he told W. Bush, we're not going to defeat the Sunni insurgency. And Bush said, oh, okay. So that was David Petraeus' one big battle that he ever won. And he said, what we're going to do instead is we're going to bribe them off. They're already killing the local, the international terrorist types who had come to help them fight, Libyans and Syrians and Saudis and so forth. And so we're going to pay them to keep doing that and to stop fighting us and make them a bunch of big promises we can't keep about how they'll be a part of the new Shiite government one day, which of course never happened. That was his, so-called success of the surge, was just getting in front of the parade of the Sunni tribes turning on al-Qaeda, which they had already been doing for more than a year before, he started in 2007. And then he picked a fight with Muqtada al-Sadr, which was a total disaster and completely hopeless and unnecessary, on the fake accusation that Sadr was the most Iran-tied Iraqi Shiite leader, when in fact he was the most nationalist and most anti-American and anti-Iran compared to the Skiri and Dawa party, who are much more for strong federalism type program. Then he takes this hoax of an Iraqi successful surge, never mind those benchmarks, where we measure progress by some things that we said we were going to achieve by the end. Forget all that. We're just going to say the surge worked 100,000 times on TV until everybody stops paying attention, which is what happened. Then based on that hoax, he went to Afghanistan. So, you got to do a surge in Afghanistan because that's what'll save the day in Afghanistan. And so you're right that Obama ran in 2008 and 7 and 8 on expanding the Afghan war. Iraq is bad. Afghanistan's the good war. That's what we're going to do. But he really only wanted to escalate by a couple of brigades in a couple of places. But once he got in there, they completely rolled him and did a huge full court press through the whole year of 2009. As you referred to there, the Center for New American Security was the Democrats' new CNAS, new PNAC of their own, CNAS. And it was made in anticipation of Hillary Clinton's new government that they expected would be inaugurated in 2009. And Michelle Flournoy was going to be the new Secretary of Defense and all this.
And Flournoy recently admitted, sorry to interrupt, that
Flournoy
recently admitted that as early as 2009, she and her CNAS colleagues knew that the Afghan government was hopelessly corrupt and that the ANA, the National Army, was going to fail, but she kept it completely to herself.
Oh, yeah. No, of course. Not that she had anything to do with then spending the next few years after promoting the policy, from CNAS. She then got a job as Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy, Doug Feitzel's spot in the Pentagon, where she was in charge of implementing the damn surge, overseeing General Petraeus and his guys as the civilian appointee, overseeing the implementation of the project. Then, as you say, once McChrystal, well, first of all, when McChrystal got there, the first big project for Coin was the town of Marja. And in fact, I just got a tweet from a guy today. Said, I was there in Marja in 2011, and the local Afghans told us the same thing you're saying right now, which is the Taliban are just waiting for you to leave, dude.
Yeah.
That's all that is. But anyway, so McChrystal admitted then that Marja is a bleeding ulcer. It's not working. And judging by the ratios of counterinsurgency, they had way more Marines and soldiers and British soldiers than they even needed by their own calculations, by far, compared to the local population. But of course, the whole thing didn't work. Here's the project. This is counterinsurgency, okay? We're going to go to this town, and we're going to convince all the people of this town that their fathers and brothers and uncles are their enemy. They're foreign invaders from beyond the moon, and we're their friends. And then we're going to be so sweet to them by killing their fathers and their brothers and their uncles, the evil foreign enemies that they must hate as much as we do, that then they're going to love us. And they're going to adopt us as their security force instead of their fathers and their uncles and their brothers. And then when we'll stand out of the way and we'll bring in our new created Afghan army to take our place. These guys who are all Tajiks and Uzbeks from 500 miles away. And we're going to bring them in, and they're going to be your new overlords, and you're going to love them just like you love us. That sound reasonable? That sound like you could pull that off in the Helmand province? Yeah, no, of course not. So even McChrystal said, okay, you're right, that's stupid, and quit right around the time that, quit trying. That is, right around the time that he got fired over Michael Hastings' great piece in the summer of 2010, or late spring, early summer of 2010.
Right.
Then Obama gets a smart clue, and he goes, you know what I'm going to do? David Petraeus, you're now demoted from head of Central Command. You're now the general in charge of the war. Which Petraeus, after talking all that smack about what a tough guy he was and about how smart he was and about how his rewritten counterinsurgency manual was the witch's brew, is going to fix everything, couldn't say no. So Obama hung it around his neck, said, if I'm going to lose this war, you're going to lose this war, punk. It's essentially what happened there. And so then what did Petraeus do? He went in there and he lost the war. He didn't even try counterinsurgency at all. He stepped up night raids on innocent families' homes, and he stepped up airstrikes on innocent families' homes. And they launched this, horrible escalation of the war that was all a bunch of bloodletting, signifying nothing. And then their entire project, remember, we're going to create a democracy with regular elections and a rule of law and all of these Western systems and a strong central government. Okay, forget that. But I'll tell you what we are going to do, though. We're going to build up an Afghan army, and that Afghan army will be strong enough to take the fight to the Taliban from now on and protect the country and the people of Afghanistan from the people of the South and East's fathers and brothers and uncles who are the ones leading this insurgency. And so then that was their project. We're going to train and train and train. But then what did the Taliban do? The Taliban just sent in infiltrators to grab a rifle and shoot all their buddies who they're training with, or worse, shoot the American trainers who are training them.
These are the green on green killings.
Yeah, or green on blue. Or however you describe it. Yeah, and the insider attacks, they call them. So this is just throwing the world's biggest monkey wrench in the works. That is just check and mate. You can't do anything now. You can't train up this army, which you couldn't have trained up anyway. This was never going to work anyway. But this was the Taliban making sure that this is never going to work. But the reality was the ANA was, and the police forces for that matter, these are guys who just showed up for a pair of boots and a rifle and a hot meal. There's, they're fighting. People talk about, like Joe Biden said about, well, geez, how are we going to keep fighting for their country when they won't fight for it? Come on. Right. They're not fighting for their own country. They never were fighting for their own country. They're fighting for our country against some people in their own country. And in fact, and Gareth Porter, unsurprisingly, is the best on this, that you can go back and find, where, he went through and found in all the DOD paperwork about how, and you can hear a million anecdotes like this too, and different sources to back it up too, that the Afghan National Army was basically made up mostly of Tajiks and Uzbeks and Hazaras from the north and the center of the country, and very few Pashtuns